Cinco de Mayo by Linda Lowery. Illustrations by Barbara Knutson. Piñatas packed with candy. Fireworks. Dancing in the streets. ¿Qué pasa? What's going on? It's Cinco de Mayo. Cinco de Mayo is the 5th day of May. It is a fiesta day in the United States and in Mexico. On a fiesta day, everyone celebrates. Cinco de Mayo is when people remember an amazing battle that took place more than 100 years ago. The story of Cinco de Mayo is a story of courage. It is a story of Mexican soldiers who changed history by beating the strongest army on earth. It is a story of the people of Mexico and the United States working together. 2 presidents and an emperor, 1861. Mexico was tired of war. For hundreds of years, Spain had ruled Mexico. Many Mexican people had lost their lives fighting to get rid of the Spanish. The Spanish left in 1821. In the 1840s, a new war broke out between Mexico and the United States. Mexico lost half its land. Now, in 1861, the Mexican people were finally free. They had a president who was Mexican. He came from a tribe of Indians called the Zapotecs. His name was Benito Juárez. Benito was the first Indian to become the president of Mexico. He had grown up poor. He was an orphan. He worked as a shepherd for one of his uncles. Benito studied hard. He went to college and became a lawyer. In 1861, Benito Juárez became the president of Mexico. He proved that even a poor shepherd could be educated and grow up to lead his country. Benito hoped that Mexico and the United States could become friends. He began writing letters to the President of the United States. Abraham Lincoln was President of the United States. He was happy to hear from Benito Juárez. Abe and Benito were very similar. Abe had also been born poor. He grew up in a log cabin. He studied hard and became a lawyer. Now, Abe was leading his country, and he had a war to deal with. The states in the north were fighting the states in the south. This war was called the Civil War. Abe Lincoln was worried. He knew that the Emperor of France was thinking about sending soldiers and weapons to help the South. With this help, the South would probably win the Civil War. The United States would be 2 countries instead of 1. The French emperor's name was Napoleon III. His army was the best in the whole world. Their uniforms were brand new. Their tall boots were shiny. Their weapons were deadly. Napoleon was greedy. He wanted to rule all of Latin America. He also wanted the South to win the Civil War. Then the United States would be weak. France would be the most powerful nation in the world. Napoleon decided to attack and capture Mexico. Then he would be able to move his army across the border to help the South. President Abe Lincoln was worried. President Benito Juárez was worried. They knew that if their countries were to remain free, they had to work together. The Battle of Puebla. Ships full of French soldiers came sailing across the Atlantic Ocean in late 1861. They landed in Mexico at a port called Veracruz. Napoleon III told his soldiers to attack Mexico City. Mexico City is the capital of Mexico. It was the home of Benito Juárez and his government. On the way, the French soldiers stopped in villages to eat and sleep. The Mexican people were afraid of the French soldiers. There was very little fighting. The French began to think that the Mexicans were cowards. Benito Juárez knew that his people were not cowards. They were simply tired of fighting. But something had to be done. Benito knew that Napoleon wanted to replace him with a fancy European prince. Then the Mexicans would not be free. Napoleon also wanted to take Mexico's gold and silver for France. Worst of all, he wanted to stamp out the Mexican way of life. But what could Benito Juárez do? There was no money to train soldiers. There was no money to buy weapons and bullets. All Benito could do was to send a small army to try to stop the French. The two armies would meet in Puebla, a town east of Mexico City. The Mexicans had about 3,000 soldiers. There were 6,000 French soldiers. The Mexican army asked farmers for help. The farmers were called campesinos. They wore straw hats and serapes and homemade sandals. They had only farm tools as weapons. But the Mexicans had a very important strength. Their hearts were in this war. They were not just protecting their treasures of gold and silver. They were protecting their own homes and their own families. They were protecting their traditions. They were protecting all the children who would grow up Mexican. It was May 5th, 1862, el Cinco de Mayo. The Mexican army knew that the French planned to attack Puebla this very day. At dawn, the cathedral bell rang out. The campesinos grabbed shovels and sharp knives called machetes. They rushed to join the Mexican troops. The campesinos and some of the soldiers hid in trenches near Puebla's two forts. In the meantime, the French army stopped to drink their morning coffee. There had been no trouble in any Mexican town so far. Why would they find trouble in Puebla? They knew that only a miserable little army was waiting. This would be an easy battle. Boldly, the French stormed the forts. They scrambled up the stone walls to shoot the Mexicans. The Mexicans shot back. Hundreds of French soldiers tumbled down. More French soldiers rushed up the walls. Those soldiers were also shot. Soon, the French had used up most of their bullets and cannonballs. This tattered army of Mexicans was beating them. How was that possible? Suddenly, thunder boomed across the sky. Lightning cracked and rain poured down. The French horses began to slip in the mud. The men in the trenches leaped out and began to shoot. Campesinos waved their machetes and stirred up nearby cattle. The cattle charged the French soldiers, who went sliding in the sloppy mud. By late afternoon, the French had lost the battle. They turned around and headed back east. In Puebla, church bells rang all night long. Mexican soldiers, helped by Mexican farmers, had beaten an army twice the size of their own. They had beaten an army that had not lost a battle in many years. As soon as he got the news, Benito Juárez made the victory a national celebration. After Cinco de Mayo, many Mexicans saw themselves in a new way. "Yo soy mexicano," people cried. "I am Mexican." They were proud to be Mexican. They were not powerless against invaders. They were determined to rule their own country. The Mexican people needed that determination. Napoleon sent 30,000 more French soldiers to Mexico. For 3 years, the Mexicans kept battling the French. During that time, every May 5th, Mexicans took time to celebrate. They proudly remembered their victory at Puebla. It reminded them to stay brave and fight for their heart's desire, a free Mexico. During those years, the Civil War went on in the United States. The South grew poorer and weaker. France could not help the South. To keep Mexico under control, Napoleon had sent more soldiers, horses, food, and weapons. He had no extra money for the South. In the meantime, President Lincoln and President Juarez kept in touch. As soon as he could, Abraham Lincoln sent guns and bullets to Mexico. When the Civil War ended in 1865, Lincoln rushed soldiers to the border. Now it was Napoleon who was worried. The United States was standing together with Mexico. Was Napoleon going to continue this war? No, he decided. Finally, in 1867, the French left Mexico. Never again has a European army invaded the Americas. Fiesta! Since May 5th, 1862, Mexicans and Americans have been good neighbors. Together, they have fought for freedom in many wars. Every year, on both sides of the border, we celebrate Cinco de Mayo. The biggest celebration takes place in Puebla, Mexico. People get up early and head for the Boulevard of the Heroes of Cinco de Mayo. There, they rent chairs to watch the parade. It is noisy and crowded. The sun beats down. Merchants holler, selling cotton candy, bubbles, and binoculars. Sombreros, they call. Straw hats. There are paper parasols in bright colors. Balloon sellers carry huge clouds of balloons. By noon, the parade begins. Colorful floats pass by, proudly showing the history of Mexico. School bands play songs they have practiced for months. Soldiers march in straight columns. Children dress up like campesinos. They carry machetes and shovels. People clap and toss confetti. Little bits of pink, blue, green, purple, and yellow paper shower down on the parade. That night, there is a show on the famous battlefield. People dress up like soldiers and act out the Battle of Puebla. They do not use bullets and cannonballs. Instead, they toss flowers at each other. They throw eggshells filled with confetti. Fireworks burst in the sky above Puebla's forts. In the United States, Cinco de Mayo has become a big fiesta too. It was not always that way. In the 1960s, Mexican Americans wanted to share their culture. They were proud of their Mexican roots. They began celebrating Cinco de Mayo. They invited neighbors to join in the fun. Now, cities across the United States hold parades on the 5th of May. Some people dress in the red, white, and green colors of the Mexican flag. Others wear traditional costumes from different states of Mexico. Families serve traditional Mexican foods. There are tacos and enchiladas and spicy snacks. One of the most famous dishes, called mole, comes from Puebla. It is a sauce made with 40 ingredients, including chilies and spices and chocolate. Children burst piñatas packed with candy, fruit, and tiny toys. People dance to the guitars and trumpets of mariachi players. The day ends with fireworks, laser light shows, and concerts. On Cinco de Mayo, Mexicans and Americans celebrate together. We celebrate the small army that won over great odds. We celebrate the food and history and music of the Mexican people. We celebrate good neighbors. Viva el Cinco de Mayo! Long live Cinco de Mayo! Spanish words. Campesinos. Campesinos. Farm workers. Cinco de Mayo. Cinco de Mayo. The 5th of May. Fiesta. Fiesta. A celebration or party. Machetes. Machetes. Large knives used to cut crops in the fields. Mariachi. Mariachi. A type of musician who wears a traditional Mexican costume and plays fiesta music in a band. Mole. Mole. A spicy sauce for meats and Mexican dishes. Piñatas. Piñatas. Colorful paper containers filled with toys and candy that children break open at fiestas. Serapes. Serapes. Wool cloaks worn over the shoulders. Sombreros. Sombreros. Hats that are made of cloth or straw and often have a wide brim.